It is maddening for everyone else. It is an epidemic, texting while walking. And tonight, one town is saying it's time to level fines against people who walk into the streets heads down, everybody else trying to dodge them. And new videos show it is more than just a nuisance. Here's ABC's Dan Harris.
Texting and walking, that thoroughly modern epidemic. Look at this guy walk into a wall, or this woman walk into a mall water fountain. And check this out, a bear on the loose, and this man texting almost walks right into him. The videos are funny, but the problem is serious. According to the most recent numbers, more than 1,000 people went to emergency rooms because they got hurt while walking and distracted on the phone. Double the year before, which was double the year before that. Bonnie Miller walked off this pier into Lake Michigan and had to be rescued by the Coast Guard.
I couldn't let pride stand in my way of warning other people, to not drive and text or walk and text. It can be dangerous.
You've had people hit and killed while distracted walking?
Correct. Well, most of the times it's because they're distracted.
The police chief is taking on what scientists call inattention blindness. Despite the modern romance with multitasking, the reality is the human brain evolved to do only one thing at a time. To test that, researchers at Western Washington University sent this clown on a unicycle through campus, and only about a quarter of people using their phones noticed him.
Only when I got real close up and he was coming towards me did I really see it.
Back in New Jersey, the police chief knows that this dangerous distraction will not go away overnight, but he hopes with his crackdown, he's doing his bit to encourage all of us to be smarter on our smartphones. Dan Harris, ABC News, Fort Lee, New Jersey.
And by the way, in London, so many people are texting and walking, they have decided to pad some of the lampposts.
Well, we've all experienced this, haven't we? We have been looking down at our phones and we trip over something, or we walk into something, or we bump into someone, hopefully while walking and not in our vehicle. Well, today we're going to start a short series called Distracted. And it's really about how in life we get so distracted from the main thing. And the main thing is knowing God and growing in our spiritual formation and growth to be more like Christ. So we're going to talk about that for these next couple of weeks. And we're going to do so in a way that we understand. Technology is supposed to make life easier, isn't it? And it does. In many respects and in many ways it does. When I prepare a message now, it's nice to be able to have all these electronic books on my computer that I can just pull up, and I can search with keywords and phrases. I can go right to the commentaries passage very quickly and easily. Certainly a whole lot better than going to the library and thumbing through. Remember those old catalog cards? You'd go through thousands of them and then pull your books off the shelf. And now things are much more right at our fingertips. We can look for a book and download it to our Kindle if we want to, or order electronically in some way and have it right at our fingertips. So I would say that technology has made our lives in many ways much easier, but it has not lived up to its promise. And the promise was that it would make us less busy. But we are busier than ever, aren't we? In fact, in some sense, it's created a multitasking society where we're expected to do many things, and we're expected to always be available and always be able to respond within an instant. And nowhere is this more obvious than in our addiction to phones. As we look down, and our phone now not only makes phone calls, but texts and gets messages on Messenger, and we can look up multiple social media platforms, Facebook to Instagram, and find out what the latest thing someone posted is, or post our latest thing, and we don't have to miss it, going back to it multiple times a day. We're checking the news. It's a 24-hour news cycle now. You're getting the latest alerts and breaking news headlines shaking in the palm of your phone or your pocket. We have information at our fingertips. All of those questions that you had that you didn't have the answers for, now you just ask Alexa or Siri, and she lets you know exactly what the answer is. We can order our food and pick up our pizzas, or we can order our groceries and have it ready for pickup whenever is convenient for us. So in some ways, life has become easier. In other ways, it's become much more busy and much more distracted, and smartphones have only made this distraction more visible and more obvious. But, humanity has historically had a problem with being distracted. In fact, I believe that we tend to prefer distraction and finding distraction to finding purpose. We'd rather be entertained than fulfilled. And that's because being entertained is such a passive endeavor, isn't it? You sit back, it feels good, it takes you away, you forget about your problems. But finding fulfillment is rather labor intensive. The ancient Roman Empire had all kinds of powerful weapons. They had catapults that would destroy their enemy. They had battering rams that could take down the largest and thickest walls. They had archers and teams of archers that could shoot their arrows in the air and have them rain down upon the enemy. But those weren't their most powerful weapon. Do you know what their most powerful weapon was? Their most powerful weapon is distraction. Yes, the ancient Romans conquered much of the known world, and they pacified their subjugated victims by providing distractions, most often in the form of entertainment. And so here on the screen you see that top picture is a Circus Maximus, where they would have horse-led chariot races and people would gather by the thousands to be entertained. Or the theaters below, they often have them in cities not far from one another. There's a theater and an amphitheater, and the difference is that the theater is that half arch that has a stage down in front, and the amphitheater is in the round. And the stage in the amphitheater is the round circle in the middle of everything, where gladiators would fight or criminals would be torn apart by wild and vicious animals. Sometimes they would even fill the bottom of the amphitheater with water and have small boats out there and have mock naval battles. I mean, it was amazing, and thousands of people would come and sit and watch and cheer and be distracted from their problems. There was one mock naval battle that occurred in 52 AD. And they said that the mock naval battle was carried out by actors. These actors were actually criminals, Roman captives. And as has been famously noted in books and in movies and even in some songs, some of the captives came before the Roman Emperor Claudius, who was there to watch this mock battle. And they said, "Hail, Caesar! Those about to die salute you." And of course, this has become such a famous statement that we see in all places. Even AC/DC has as a famous line in one of their songs with a minor change, where they cry out, "For those about to rock, we salute you." Rome used distraction to pacify the masses, because they learned that the masses wanted to be pacified. In 1995, Sheryl Crow had a hit of her own. She topped the charts with a song whose famous chorus line was, "Lie to me, I promise I'll believe." And isn't that humanity's theme song? So many people got upset when Karl Marx penned, "Religion is the opiate of the people." Though it was quoted grossly out of context, there's still truth to be found in this misunderstanding. Even Christianity has often been divided against itself throughout its many years, fighting over insignificant interpretations, not because they love God so much, but because they love to be distracted by fights and focused on conquering and overcoming others rather than conquering themselves. Most of humanity is distracted most of the time, and that includes you and me. Today we have 24-hour news, and we're constantly going back to it. Or our divisive politics that everyone says they hate, but it gives them a bit of life, though we don't like to admit it. Our divisive politics today has really become a form of entertainment, and the news media captures on it. Doesn't matter which side you're on. They're all biased. It makes you feel kind of like when you're sitting in front of a baseball game or sitting in front of the TV to watch a football game, and when your team is winning, you're shouting and cheering and you're excited and you feel like you're winning, and when your team is losing, you're upset and you're shouting at the quarterback or the referee for what a poor call that he made, and you feel like you're winning or you're losing, even though all you're really doing is sitting on the couch. The same can be true of our entertainment of politics today. nations rise and fall. But is what you're focused on eternal? Is what you're focused on have eternal significance? You know, all of Scripture summons humanity to refocus. It seeks to shake us awake from our slumber. And no verse does that more vividly than the verse that we're going to read today. Matthew 10, verse 28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. We're going to stop there for now. We're going to be looking at the scriptures that come right before this and the scriptures that follow for a bit of context as we move along in the message. But I hesitated to even use this passage because I thought the passage itself could really be a distraction, because it could get us focused on the threat of hell rather than on what the passage is actually trying to help us to relate to and understand. And some people have used this passage to scare other people into following Jesus, and other people have been scared into following Jesus because of this passage. But how terrible to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. There always ends up being something corrupt about that. Really, this passage is just a classic case of Jewish hyperbole, Jewish overemphasis, or Jewish overspeak in order to make a strong point. We see an example of this in the Old Testament that you'll be familiar with, though maybe you didn't realize it was hyperbole, where in the Old Testament it says, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. And we're such straightforward people, not that we don't understand hyperbole, we're exaggerating all the time. We love exaggeration. But whenever we Westerners tend to read something, we read it as straightforward, as fact, as just giving us information and correct details. That's why we get duped all the time in our emails or whatever we happen to see on the internet, the latest truths or facts that go out there that get us all riled up. Pretty much anytime anything seems a bit outrageous, it probably is because it is. And the same thing goes true of this. Sometimes we read the text, we read Scripture in such a literal way when the Jewish people seem to understand hyperbole and overemphasis, and there was a reason why they used it. Did God really hate Esau? You say, well, the text says he did. But follow the story. Someone who's rather astute in following the story rather than just looking at one isolated passage will look at the whole context, and you'll see that Jacob lied, cheated, and stole from Esau. He ran away in order to hide from him because he was in trouble with Esau. And one day, years later, he decides to come back to Israel. And on his way back, he hears that his brother Esau has found out about his coming back and is coming out to meet him with a number of men. And Jacob is afraid because Jacob has lied, cheated, and stolen from Esau. And so he sends everything ahead of him. He sends all of his belongings, his wives, his servants, his cattle, and everything he owns. And he sends a great gift to Esau, a large portion of this, and his servants to tell him, here, this is yours, trying to appease Esau. But when Esau sees him, Esau grabs him and hugs him and welcomes him back and says, what's this? Why do you send these things to me? I don't need them. I've already been blessed by God. I already have great prosperity, and God has been good to me. I don't need any of these things, brother. You see, God didn't hate Esau. God blessed Esau and loved Esau. But what was happening is that the verse was there to make a point. You see, there was a promise that came to Abraham and traveled through Isaac and now would travel through Jacob, although Jacob was the second born. And that's unusual in Jewish culture because usually the firstborn is the one who gets the promise and the inheritance. And God was saying in no uncertain terms, I've chosen Jacob, through whom I will bring the promise. But did he literally hate Esau? Nothing in the story makes you think that. He blessed Esau. But in no uncertain terms, the promise would come through Jacob. And the same thing is happening here in our text today. God's not saying, fear me because I can throw you body and soul into hell. What he's telling us is that we shouldn't fear anything but God. We shouldn't follow anything but God. Men can hurt you, they can destroy your body, but God is eternal, and he has to do with your eternal outcomes. He's the creator and the sustainer of all things. He needs to be our primary focus, not these little distractions. Everything else, including fear itself, is a distraction. The section actually begins a little earlier. It says, "A student is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher and the servant to be like his master." And of course, in this passage, we are the students and Jesus is the teacher. What verse 24 is really trying to emphasize, what it's telling us, is that we're called to seek to emulate Jesus and his way in the world. That is, what was his focus must become our focus, and what his focus was carrying out God's will for his life. This verse doesn't intend for us to focus on the fear of hell. It intends for us to discern what our focus is. Are we focused on the expectations of the world, what men can do to us? Or are we focused on God, who holds our eternal soul and our eternal destiny? The world holds no lasting power over us, so why do we bow and seek its self-seeking desires? On the other hand, God created and sustains us. He sustains our very being, both now and forever. He created us and designed us, so pay attention to him. Hell cannot be what motivates us, because fear is a terrible motivator, and it always is mixed with corruption and sin. But instead, the passage is asking us, what is inspiring you to take hold of the dream that God has for your life? And this has nothing to do with the American dream. This has nothing to do with material prosperity or rising in power over others. But rather it has to do with God's dream for who he created you to be. He's interested in your person, not your personal achievements. God is not in competition with you the way that the world is always setting us in competition with each other. Instead, God seeks your interest, because your interest is what he's interested in. If you're competing against someone else, then you've entered the wrong competition. As someone once wisely said, the only person you need to try to be better than is the person you were yesterday. Our goal is becoming more like Christ, becoming the person that God created you to be, not what others want you to be, not more like someone else. I love a saying by Rabbi Zushya. Rabbi Zushya says, "On the day of judgment, God will not ask me why I was not Moses. He will ask me, why were you not Zushya?" What are you doing daily, regularly, that helps motivate you toward God's dream for your life? What are you reading, watching, interacting with that is motivating and inspiring you for what God intends for you? Becoming more like Christ isn't about becoming more busy or all the things you're doing to help others, and those might be great things. But even your doing must flow out of your being. If you're just doing what everyone else thinks you should be doing so that you look right and good in their eyes, then they have become your God. They're the ones now directing you. These well-intentioned dragons may not even mean you any harm. It's just that they can only see their own personal vision, which may even be the vision that God has for their lives. But the problem is that they can't differentiate between themselves and you. So they think that whatever they're passionate about is what God has for you as well. And if you're not doing what they think is important, then you're not doing God's will. It's not their fault. They're just still spiritually immature, and they have a limited perspective. Like newborn infants, as psychology informs us, they think everything else is just an extension of themselves. They can't differentiate between themselves and their mother, right? They believe that their mom is just an extension of themselves, and for a while she kind of tends to be, because she's doing everything to please them, which is good and right at that stage of life. But I believe that this is why Paul tells us that some people are still drinking infant's milk when they should have grown up enough to eat solid foods by now. And these people always think they're right, so don't bother arguing with them. Right? Instead, you must simply learn and simply know how to differentiate between them and you, because you're the only one who can do this. They're not going to do it for you. And then, secondly, Don't be that person. Don't be that person. Don't be the person who always has an opinion about what everyone else should be doing. Tend to your own field. And this is a good place to talk about how we often get distracted by the way we think things should be. And we tend to do what we think we should be doing from the messages we get from the society around us, rather than what God's actually called us to be doing. And oftentimes we're doing things out of guilt rather than conviction. And here's a difference, a bit of a word picture. You know, guilt, I think of guilt as something that throws you in the ditch on the side of the road and makes you feel like you don't deserve to be anywhere but there. You feel guilty and terrible and like you failed and that you're no good. Conviction is very different. Conviction is going to tell you some hard truths about yourself that you're not going to be comfortable with and you're not going to like. But with conviction will also come inspiration and motivation to climb up out of the ditch and be the person God's called you to be. It'll help you live into transformation. It won't leave you in the ditch like guilt does. You don't need someone else to tell you what you should be doing. You're a child of God, and you can hear God for yourself. You simply need to know that you're doing God's will, and you can know that you're doing God's will. And when you're doing God's will, you will know because it's what He's called you to do. You'll know because God will give you the desire to do it. And it will be something that becomes very meaningful for you. Not meaningful because it's meaningful to someone else and you're having to toe the line to do it. And even if it's something that you wouldn't naturally tend toward, if it's God's desire for you, He'll give you the desire to do it. You'll do it because you'll know something deep down it's good and right, not because you feel guilty, but because you feel convicted toward it. God will place the desire in you and draw you toward it. You'll simply know and sense that it's from Him because you'll already be aligned toward it. Let's continue verse 29 and 31. Going just ahead, we've already gone behind verse 28. Now we're going after it. It says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid." Did you hear that? So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Wait a second. Verse 21 told us to fear the one who can destroy both body and soul. But then verse 29 says, but don't be afraid. Do you see how that verse 28 is more of a hyperbole? God doesn't want you to be afraid or to do things out of fear. Instead, He wants us to trust the path that He has for us. We can trust the path that God guides us on. And even the places that we stray, He can redeem that as well. He wants us to follow Him, not others. We don't have to follow God out of fear, and we certainly don't need to follow others out of fear. Verse 31 assures us that verse 28 is not a threat. We don't have to be afraid. God's will and intention for us flows from the worth that He ascribes to us. He wants us to follow Him and not others. Not out of fear, but out of faith. Faith that He has a plan for us, a plan not to harm us, but to prosper us. And not to prosper us as the world counts prosperity, but rather the true prosperity that flows from what truly provides life. Everything else is just a distraction.